Right. On the one hand, at the end of the chain of potential influence, there is the human being. So that's hacking the human being. On the other hand, there are the often nameless, organized adversarial users of technology equipped with the latest technologies. Let us now switch from the focus on us, humans, the target of all that technology, to technology itself, quantum technology. It has profound implications for more than just the international security. How quantum computing can potentially redefine political relations and shape the new digital world order. That is what we're going to discuss now, and for that, we will have Deborah Finkel, Associate Laboratory Director for National Security Sciences at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory of the Department of Energy, Director of Research of the US National Security Agency in 2014-2020, Michelle Mosca, co-founder and professor at the Institute for Quantum Computing of the University of Waterloo, and co-founder, president, and CEO of Evolution QINC. Jaya Balu, she is vice chair of the Strategic Advisory Board at Quantum Flagship and chief information security officer for Avast Software. Vikram Sharma, founder and CEO of Quintessence Labs, and Vladimir Sukhariev, principal cryptographic technologist, the chief post-quantum researcher at InfoSec Global. And the conductor for this concert, ladies and gentlemen, of this extraordinary orchestra of master experts is Amit Katwala, the senior editor at Wired UK.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this panel discussion on international security in the era of quantum computing. Quantum computers are a new type of device that work according to the law X. They solve personal problems that are currently unsolvable by even the world's best supercomputers. And they have the potential to revolutionize everything from material science to financial risk analysis. But quantum computers could also have big cybersecurity implications. They could break the algorithms that we use to secure our data. They could enable uncrackable quantum communications, and there are potentially big international geopolitics implications. So for the next hour, we're going to be talking about some of these issues, and I'm really happy to be joined by a distinguished panel of experts from industry and academia. And we should have some time for questions at the end as well, so you can put those in the chat window, and we'll get through as many of those as we can. I thought it would be good if we could start by kind of quickly introducing ourselves, and then I'll jump straight in with some questions. So my name is Amit Katwala. I'm a journalist and senior editor at Wired UK, where I've written about the race for quantum supremacy and the geopolitical implications of quantum technology. We are joined by Deborah. Deborah, would you like to say a few words to introduce yourself?
First, yes, thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation to come and talk on this topic for this particular audience. I'm looking forward to hearing my companions as well. My current job is as the Associate Lab Director at the Oak Ridge National Laboratory. That is a Department of Energy in the United States National Laboratory focused on science problems. And what we do is we take a look both at the scientific underpinnings of national security, coming up with a national security science, and then applying the sciences of our own and those across the rest of the laboratory to national security problems. As mentioned previously, I was the Director of Research for the U.S. government's National Security Agency, which has three missions, two and a half. The first mission is the defensive mission of the infrastructure. The second is relating to the foreign intelligence mission. And the third relates to Cyber Command and the support that we have as well. I did want to say the last name is Frankie, but as long as you call me Deb, we won't have any confusion. Thanks very much.
We're also joined by Michele Mosca. Michele.
Hello, Michele Mosca here. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel. My background's actually in regular, classical public key cryptography. And when I first heard of quantum computing while I was studying, doing my graduate studies at Oxford, I went through sort of Schopenhauer's three phases of rejecting it, ridiculing it, and then accepting it as self-evident. So I started working and understanding the power of quantum computers because it was going to define the new framework for cryptography. So then when I came to Waterloo and started the quantum computing effort here. The research focus is focused on both the power of quantum computing and also preparing our cyber infrastructures to be secure against quantum attacks. So I'm looking forward to talking about the current state and the next steps that need to be taken. And I generally take sort of a risk-based approach to managing the challenges, as well as taking advantage of the opportunities.
We are also joined by Vikram Sharma. Vikram, would you like to say a few words to introduce yourself?
Good afternoon, Amit, and thank you so much for the opportunity to participate in today's discussion. I'm the founder and CEO of Quintessence Labs. We're a company based out of Australia with offices in the United States and a presence in the UK. We deliver strong data protection solutions through the synthesis of some quantum effects, along with an advanced software stack to look to mitigate some of the effects that we will see from the advent of quantum computers, but doing so in a way that addresses some of the cybersecurity challenges that we're facing today by implementing enterprise-scale encryption. We provide a series of building blocks, which we believe will provide some of the foundations of a future quantum-safe architecture.
Thank you, Vikram. Vladimir Sukharev from InfoSec Global. Can you tell us a bit about your role, please?
Well, yeah, I'm Vladimir, and I work as a principal cryptographic technologist and also at the same time chief post-quantum researcher at InfoSec Global, where our focus is not just on post-quantum cryptography on its own, but also on the transition process. So we have this notion of cryptographic agility that we're working on, which kind of completes the picture when we talk about the transitioning process to post-quantum cryptography, or actually any type of cryptography we can actually think of. And I got into post-quantum cryptography area back when I was a University of Waterloo graduate student towards the end of my master's, and then went through this area throughout my PhD. I'm also part of the NIST post-quantum standardization process that is currently ongoing.
And finally, I'm not 100% sure if Jaya is here, but Jaya, if you're here, would you mind introducing yourself, please?
Yes, hi, I'm here. Apologies, I'm on the phone instead of joining online. So my name is Jaya Balu. I am the Chief Information Security Officer at Avast, but I'm also representing KPN Telecom for the European Quantum Flagship, which is attempting to do research and development for Europe in a $1 billion program, and is one of 3 flagships to really promote all quantum technologies for the benefit of European citizens.
Great, thank you so much. So let's get right into it then. So I think what I'd like to do is kind of start broad and maybe narrow down into some of the specifics a little bit later on. So quantum computing has been kind of, touted as the sort of next big thing that's going to revolutionize everything. But I mean, kind of focusing in on just the cybersecurity landscape, what are some of the opportunities and threats that you think quantum computing can bring to the cybersecurity landscape? So I'm going to ask each of you this kind of in turn. So I'll go through in the same order again. So Deborah, would you maybe like to have a bash at this first question?
Certainly, thanks for that question. I want to start with something that isn't always mentioned in these conversations, and that is the quantum sensing opportunities. Quantum metrology, when you entangle qubits in order to get more precise measurements, could improve everything about the safety and security and precision of our GPS to other kinds of sensors. So I think that needs to be put on the table as a wonderful opportunity for better ability to pinpoint where activities are occurring, and that can be important for national security, from disaster recovery to any other kind of military application. Other things, I'm actually heartened by the thought of using quantum computing, whether it's intermediate scale or ultimately high performance quantum computing, for positive modeling and other kinds of activities that can be done on that form of algorithm that will be beneficial nationally. So economic security is national security, and making sure that we have strong quantum in those areas is important as well. There are 2 areas that are often brought up, and so I'll hit those because I think that's where you meant us to focus a bit. And that has to do with post-quantum cryptography, quantum resistance it's often called, and then very high performance quantum. So just to tap at the problem of high-performance quantum, the notion is, as was developed in the early 90s, 94, by Peter Shor, an algorithm was identified that could break one of the hardest problems we had, the one at the core of public key encryption, which is the ability to factor very, very large integers very rapidly. And right now, we tend to use large key sizes, and that, in essence, is how our infrastructure is built and made to be more secure, that it's difficult to break and to factor those very large integers. Quantum computer can theoretically do so much more rapidly, so the thing that might normally take billions of years could be done in a much shorter range of time, in a range that puts that information in immediate danger. And so there's considerable concern. That leads to the next step, which is, so there's the threat. And then the promise would be, so let's go ahead and think about quantum resistance. And one of my colleagues has mentioned being part of an important approach that's international in scope, but led out of the US government, out of NIST, which is looking at quantum resistant algorithms. They've been in progress for some 3 years. They've gone from 69 to 25, and now I think they're down to 15 that look like they're appropriate. And that offers both opportunity and threat. The opportunity is, of course, to devise a new algorithm that is both secure against classical attacks on encryption and also quantum attacks. And so those who are devising hardware and software need to look at those as well. Stepping to the final one that's often brought up in this context is quantum communication. And that I'm particularly enthusiastic from the standpoint of, while it's a nascent and early stage technology, when we talk about redesigning the internet at all, I'm enthusiastic because we did not design security in from the beginning. Anytime we step back and take a look at a new way to talk about communications gives us an opportunity to do that from the onset. It also gives us a danger in that people do tend to run to implementation without considering the security question. So I'd call that both opportunity and threat. Amit, back to you.
Thank you so much. So, Michele, Deborah obviously covered quite a kind of range of different possibilities there when it comes to cybersecurity, particularly Shor's algorithm, which has been touted as a kind of a danger for RSA encryption in particular. How far away are we from having devices that could actually run these algorithms in a way that would be potentially threatening?
So that's a great question that we've been asked, for 20 years or more now, and the answer is constantly evolving. My current, last year at the Etsy IQC workshop, I stated my own personal view was about a 20% chance within 10 years. I also think there's already a non-trivial chance, a 1 to 5% chance, within 5 years. Now, and we've interviewed also, over last year, we interviewed 22 thought leaders from around the world. These are not people who are particularly in the business of cybersecurity or so on, but whose opinions really matter. And we've produced sort of a histogram of their responses to these questions. And there's variance, but there's definitely, the estimates I just said are roughly in the middle of the pack. So it's already, I think, too close for comfort, given the long time scales it takes to protect our cyber, to migrate our cyber systems to be resilient to these emerging attacks. There's really no time to waste to do it properly. So the time scales are, there's already a non-negligible chance of it happening in under 10 years, and it starts to become quite substantial even in 15 years.
So Jaya, with that in mind, what kind of conversations have you been having with people kind of working in the cybersecurity space and looking at quantum? And is it possible to kind of get ready for it now, even though obviously these technologies are, maybe 5 years away, maybe 50 years away?
I think the biggest thing is in our space, or in general, not just in the security community, but in the tech community, we suck at transitioning. We're not good at change. So the best chance we have of getting it right later is starting early. And even then, it's not about waiting for the algorithm, because arguably everything that we've ever transmitted has already been somehow compromised, just because of, store now, decrypt later phenomenon. But that being said, understanding what your cryptographic assets are, which would need to transition once there was a new algorithm, or there was a conceivable threat of a quantum computer actually being able to break the algorithms we currently use, that transition time is not trivial. And organizations need to understand and prepare now, and preferably play just try out stuff. One of the things that we did at KPN is we played with one of the NIST candidate algorithms and created a post-quantum implementation of WireGuard so that we could just see how that works on a telecom network, just how robust it is. Is it telecom grade? And could we actually put customers on something like that? So I think it becomes really relevant to start now instead of waiting for all of the threats to arrive and then thinking about what to do.
Thank you, Jay. Vikram, quantum isn't just necessarily a kind of threat to security. There are also ways in which it could strengthen security. So I'm thinking of things like quantum random number generators and things like that. Can you tell me a bit about your work in this area and the potential opportunities that quantum might bring?
Absolutely, Amit. I'd actually build on the comments from my colleagues before that much as quantum can pose a threat to some of the techniques that we're using today to safeguard sensitive information, it offers an opportunity to strengthen it. And really, I think the opportunity when you look back at the sort of macro level is, as Deborah perhaps just mentioned, is to rethink how we build in security into our infrastructures of the future. And that has a number of elements to it. Some of them are just conventional. So looking at ways whereby we can have cryptographic agility, whereby we may incorporate some of the mechanisms we're using today, but for protecting information, but yet at the same time provisioning for quantum resistant algorithms once they are approved and recommended. But we do see that alongside that, there's the opportunity for quantum capabilities to complement some of those techniques. In particular, I think you quite rightly mentioned the ability of quantum effects to generate true random numbers. True random numbers, of course, are a vital, we believe, constituent, building block, if you like, of almost any security credential, encryption keys or otherwise. There are multiple ways to do that. However, to date, we've largely been doing through that from software, which can expose the encryption keys that are created therefrom to future risk if they're not truly random. So quantum provides an ability to create, as best as we can tell, assured by the laws of quantum physics, true random numbers. And we can do so very reliably and at high speed. In fact, we have devices which have been in production and in use across banks, government, defense institutions for over 5 years now. So that's one absolutely key component. And the other is, I guess, somewhat future-looking technology of around quantum comms and using quantum for distributing keys very securely. So you're changing the paradigm, not using mathematics to protect the key exchange, but using the laws of physics, which does change, I guess, some of what the threat profile could look like. And we see networks of the future that would have a complement of quantum-resistant algorithms, probably in the main, but over certain secure links using quantum comms for the exchange of highly sensitive information.
Thank you. So Vladimir, I want to dive in on that last point around kind of quantum-resistant cryptography. So you mentioned that you're working on post-quantum cryptography as part of the NIST competition. Can you give us a sense of where that effort is at and what's looking like it's going to be the kind of replacement, the quantum secure replacement for some of the kind of widespread systems that we're using now?
Well, one thing to start off is the post-quantum algorithms world is quite a bit different from what we're used to seeing today, right? For example, if we're talking about, say, a key agreement at the same time as a digital signature, we know that we have, elliptic curve-based key agreement, for example, coupled along together with ECDSA, and we can use the same curves, and so we can have the same primitives as the underlying part there. Now, what happens in the post-quantum world, things are a bit different. There's no one solution that takes it all. That's why, out of those 15 candidates that are left at this point, I suspect there's probably going to be 3 to 5 candidates that are going to get standardized, which are going to be of completely different flavors. So, there's probably going to be lattice-based, isogeny-based, hash-based, and so on. So, and they're mathematically very different primitives. Therefore, that's another sort of issue in the sense that when we're trying to say, we're going to use this crypto or that crypto, we should be even flexible after both quantum standards are here, due to the fact that we'll need to support, those very different flavored cryptographies. And so the efforts right now, what they're kind of looking at is, I think down to those 15 is so far, the security of those ones has shown to be well, but it's now, have to look at performance versus, the overhead, the key sizes, and so on. So there's a lot of optimizations going in that direction. But, it's still sort of, again, even in that sense, not just talking about those 5 major categories that are there, but also, one solution could be very efficient, but could have enormously huge key size. Another one could actually have very small key sizes, but, be, much slower. And so therefore, that's another sort of choice of picking. And so therefore, this is the balance, the research and looking at those algorithms has to find a balance and make sure that the set of algorithms that are going to get picked is going to reflect all the possible use cases.
Great, thank you so much. So one of the ways that this kind of quantum technology sometimes gets framed is a kind of a global competition, between the United States and Europe and China. And there was a paper from a few years ago that kind of looked at the risk of one side or one country kind of developing this technology and kind of racing ahead, and what the potential implications of that might be from a sort of security perspective or an international security perspective. So this is kind of a more general question. So feel free to jump in. I'm going to kind of pose it to the panel as a whole. But to what extent does a kind of uncrackable form of quantum secure communication pose from a geopolitical perspective? What could be the potential implications be if one country were to develop that before any others? Anyone who wants to jump in, please do.
Amit, sorry, maybe I could just jump in quickly. Hi.
So what's
Can you guys hear me?
Hi,
Yeah.
sorry, I can hear you. Yes. So the question was, how much of a threat would a literally uncrackable form of quantum communication pose if one country was to reach that point before any others?
I think arguably some of that, may have already happened. I think when we say uncrackable, I mean, this is arguable, this is debatable about what that means. But I think that the issue is that there's, we've already talked about other types of technologies falling under a Wassenaar type agreement where you are not allowed to export them without very specific permissions, and you certainly aren't allowed to export them to specific countries. So beyond the whole idea of a digital divide simply by the have and the have-nots, there are going to be very specific restrictions imposed, even if you could potentially afford this technology, that it wouldn't be allowed to be used by anyone. So I think that's, part of the parcel. We already know this from a cybersecurity perspective. We've already placed certain types of penetration testing tools in that realm because we find them tools that can be used for dual use, so both protect your own infrastructure but also to attack someone else. And I think when we have any type of quantum technology that qualifies under this dual use standard, that it isn't just used to protect yourself, but potentially could also be used to inflict harm on others, that we're definitely talking about these types of export regimes. And whether that's solely the use of a computer that has proven quantum supremacy or encryption technology that can't be cracked by anyone else. And arguably, again, I think there are certain countries, specifically I'm thinking about the terrestrial network of China, and there was a statement made that this was specifically of use, for example, potentially in a regional war, that these types of things then beg the question, how long will this still be a technology that will be free to trade and utilize without any other international restrictions coming on top of it?
Thank you. That's really fascinating.
Perhaps jumping in there, Amit, if I may add to Jay's comments there.
Yeah, please do. Yeah.
So I think, the second part of it is that you were talking about what potential strategic advantage it may confer. And I think it does come down to the fact that it's quite unclear as Michele indicated before as to what the sort of timeline is as to when such an advantage may potentially occur. And there are quite wide range of estimates at the moment. But what it does suggest is that we do have adequate time now from a prudent risk management perspective to start thinking about what are some of the mechanisms that we need to put in place so that we're not exposed to that potential risk of unexpected development from another nation state, for example. So perhaps it does suggest to us that timely action now could, in some good measure and perhaps to a substantial degree, mitigate against that risk.
If I might step in as well with a bit of a caution, whenever I hear the phrase uncrackably secure, I don't trust it. And the reason is that we think through many different encryption algorithms, keys that we thought were unassailable, hardware we thought was unassailable. It rarely turns out to be true. Human error in devising the hardware or the implementation is a weakness. As well, when one thinks through quantum, we're basing much of the security upon the physics, and that protects us against the mathematically based attacks. I would argue we don't yet have a thorough understanding of physics-based attacks. And so one needs to consider that in any hybrid network, you're going to have both. So potentially, rather than uncrackably secure, we have vulnerability to both kinds of activities because we're not likely to have wholly quantum-esque networks or computing infrastructure at any time nearby. So just a vote of caution that we should continue to manage with defense in depth, have multi-level of security, and then begin to think about what it means to program in physics in a secure manner, as well as how to communicate in physics in a secure manner. And it goes way beyond the algorithms and the network protocols that we have in place, down to the human element of devising and having a secure supply chain for getting equipment, et cetera.
So if I could just add to that, I never meant to imply that there was any unassailable algorithm.
Oh, I agree, Diane. No offense intended.
Yeah, no. That was very much my implication, so I apologize.
Yeah, no, exactly. I'm going to blame Amit here. I was reusing his words. But to be very clear, I fully agree with you. I think that we still haven't fixed the underlying foundational part of our infrastructure in terms of secure protocols, secure hardware, secure software, and of course, a thorough understanding of who's trying to attack us at any given moment. So it requires all of that before we apply algorithms and expect any type of security. So fully agree with the defense in depth thing. My point is still that when we have a standard, regardless of where it comes from, even with the peer review that's currently going on, there's still potential for, I think countries to demand certain types of export restriction on any technology we have, which they wouldn't want in anyone else's hands.
I think Jaya and I are in violent agreement.
Yep.
But if I could add there, Amit, I think Deborah's point is quite correct there. The physics-based approaches are nascent, and in contrast to mathematics-based approaches, which are well understood and have been studied over many decades, understanding well, certainly from a physics perspective, there are a number of proofs which have come out to support some of the strength of what physics-based approaches could offer in terms of, let's say, key exchange. However, for that to translate across into the cryptographic community, we do need to obviously understand these from a cybersecurity perspective better, have standards against which these technologies can be assessed and internationally recognized standards. So I think that is where these hybrid models will probably require development in our methodologies for assessment for them to become incorporated into quantum safe networks of the future.
Yes, thank you so much. So,
comment.
Yeah, absolutely, please. Yeah.
So in terms of, there's two aspects to the question. In terms of the asymmetric availability of quantum computers and the security implications of that, I think it's in everyone's power and control to take that risk off the table by simply deploying quantum safe cryptography in due time. And there's really nothing fundamentally stopping us from doing that other than just deciding to do it. It won't be perfect, and there'll be, but we can reestablish the status quo, basically, where really there isn't, to our knowledge, a lot of damage being done because of cryptanalysis, mathematical cryptanalysis. It's the other methods that Deborah was alluding to, and other mistakes and human compromise and so on. And so we can reestablish the status quo and not have to worry about who has a quantum computer and who doesn't, because our algorithms are resilient to known quantum attacks. And I think it would serve humanity and the global economy well to, there's enough uncertainty in the world right now. We can take that one off the table. I think that would serve everybody well. And in terms of reestablishing the status quo, there's really nothing stopping anyone in the world from doing that. And I agree with Vikram in that we can do better than that. And so back to your first question, how does quantum help or positively impact cybersecurity? One of the ways it does is it's forcing us, in a sense, to rebuild the foundations of our cybersecurity by redeploying new crypto and adding in all these extra positive features that we otherwise wouldn't have been there wouldn't have been a strong enough impetus for it, like agility, like Vladimir was saying, and so on. And it also allows us to layer in additional defenses like quantum key distribution, quantum random number generation, which is not intended as a substitute for the so-called post-quantum algorithms that our friends at NIST and around the world are driving, which is a really important part of the solution. But it's an additional piece which can help mitigate other risks, such as the unexpected cryptanalysis of these algorithms we're loving and wanting to put out there. But there's still some residual risk, and quantum cryptography can mitigate that as well as some other risks. Again, if you combine these tools in the ecosystem, it just gets stronger than it currently is. So I think that's the approach I would take in answering your question.
Thank you. So Vladimir, to turn to you, is there, how long will it take? Obviously you're working on standards, but is there going to be a lag between standards being developed and standards being rolled out to the point where our networks are secure and safe from quantum attacks? And obviously, as has been alluded to, there are rumors that data has been collected, encrypted data has been collected, waiting for a quantum computer that can crack it, and that data is never going to be safe, is it?
Right now the cryptanalysis done on all the post-quantum candidates right now is with respect to how much we know about the quantum computer. And I guess to your question, saying that we can't really have a true cryptanalysis without a quantum computer being around. This is true to some extent because nobody says that quantum computer has more capabilities than we currently think it has. That's one side of it, but at the same time, we have no idea if there's something beyond the quantum computer that can actually do even more than quantum computer can do. So, and then what is that thing going to be called? So at this point, even a lot of traditional cryptography, right? When we do cryptanalysis on that part, again, we don't usually have to use a classical computer to crack it. We know theoretically how things work, and so we do some theoretical analysis, and usually they prove to be quite efficient in the sense that, given that everything's used as it's supposed to be used according to the standards or according to how the algorithm was specified, the randomness is proper there and all these things. So at this point, I think we're in a good shape in the sense of trying to figure out what's secure, what's insecure, and how much we know about quantum computer right now. What's going to be there in the future once it's actually physically here or anything else is physically here? We'll definitely be relooking at cryptanalysis, but at the current development from quantum computing side, what I see is that we're like the quantum industry, the one that's actually working on building the quantum computer, they're going to try to at least get to the point of which algorithms we already figured out the quantum computer will be able to run. So therefore, something unexpected, I think there's a low chance of finding something expected in the next, within the next, say, 30 years or so on. So I would think that, my point of view is that the way we're doing cryptanalysis on potential PQC schemes is sufficient for now.
Yeah. If I could point out that there's a piece of that, we tend to focus on stored information, And I'd like us to add the concept of legacy systems with databases that are maintained in an old style system. So we have the power to change, right? We have potentially algorithms that will be available for us to use that we'll consider to be quantum resistant and classically resistant. How many of our nations and how many of our most important publicly managed databases will be updated to use those? If you step back and look at most of our nations, and I'm looking at this globally, infrastructure, there are many very critical systems that retain data that still have the same algorithms of 10, 20 years and longer ago. Still the same computing systems, I'd say COBOL, for instance, in the United States, but others. And so it's not so much it's stored, it's our willingness to upgrade the future databases so that when at some point, when and if we have sufficiently large high performance quantum that can crack it, do we have actually implemented the algorithms that we've so carefully been devising now and that we should have by then available? That, I think, is the key question, as that's more where you're going to have the more recent data that would be more valuable to someone who would seek to attack it, rather than stored data that might be 20 years old. There's a time value of information, and it's those legacy systems that will have the shorter time frame since it was stored in a potentially vulnerable system.
One thing when we talk about the data stored, we have to look at how it was encrypted. For example, we know that all the symmetric crypto is actually secure against quantum threats. So therefore, if we establish a key using a public key methods and then use that, say, using AES or something like this, yes, then that's a problem. So each of the database requires kind of a look into how exactly that key was produced or where did they obtain that key. If it was just randomly generated on premises and put into AES, I don't think there's a need to worry at this point. If, again, it was established by, some connection between two entities using some public key and then using that information to establish that AES key that they used to encrypt the database, then, then we have a trouble here. So this requires kind of a deeper dive and seeing, what exactly is vulnerable, what's not vulnerable from that side.
And I think, Amit, that probably raises another important consideration for enterprises and agencies alike, is the criticality of really understanding what information assets you hold, and of those, what is sensitive, and understanding what mechanisms have been used to protect that, so that you can exactly address some of the concerns that Deborah and Vladimir were mentioning there, and transition those systems, particularly if they have some time value, to quantum safe algorithms.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything they wanted to add on that point? Okay, cool. So I think just to kind of play devil's advocate a little bit there, I think that what I find interesting about this is that obviously at the moment it's very much coming from academia, so all the conversations are very open and information is being shared. And Vladimir, you kind of mentioned you don't think it's likely that there's going to be kind of a surprise attack of a type that we didn't know anything about beforehand. To what extent do you think that is predicated on those academic channels kind of remaining open? And could you see a situation where countries kind of retreat into their shell and stop sharing their research, and therefore you kind of get these attacks or new techniques being developed that come into the wild for the first time, and we don't know anything about them or how to stop them?
So in terms of that, I mean, we never have really a true guarantee that anybody's, doing any extra research in a closed way. I mean, a lot of things right now, it seems like people are trying to share is, as we're still, have some time before the emergence of the, real quantum computer. And right now people are I think there's more interest right now of actually showing the new advancement rather than, creating something that could potentially be useful, because it might end up being useful maybe in like 30 years or 50 years, right? So at this point, I think, at least that's what it seems to me from looking from the research point of view on these things. I think we're okay at that point that, to assume that most likely there's almost zero or maybe a little bit, or non-research happening that is not publicly available for, developing some extra capabilities of quantum computer. And again, as I mentioned, I think at this point, it's probably, even if you're thinking from, it paying off to a certain extent, some organizations, it's probably a better situation right now for an organization to say, oh, we got this news, new approach that we discovered, that we can do on a quantum computer right now and get benefits for doing that than to do this research secretly, keep it, in their back pocket for potentially to maybe use it in, 30 or 50 years.
Can I add to that, Amit?
Yes, please do. Yeah, of course.
So I think there's an additional concern here. So I can tell you that from a European perspective, when it comes to the standardization of algorithms, I mean, of course, it's great that we have a general degree of openness in the academic community. But if you take a look at the standards processes, they're not always as equally transparent. So, for example, in cybersecurity, there's a very strong concern that NIST is not a perfect organization that is impervious to meddling, specifically by agencies like the NSA. An example of this was with dual EC, and there are just some major red flags that happened there, and yet, we had dual EC elliptic curve. And there is a similar concern that's happening still around the new standard for a post-quantum algorithm. In fact, very recently, Dan Bernstein published a paper where he believed that there was a sort of pushing in terms of the independence of NIST by the NSA to favor one algorithm above another, potentially predicated on the fact that one was easier to crack or that they had found some sort of weakness. And this is just a few weeks ago. So my point is that even despite that openness, it doesn't mean that it's generally accessible or understood even by the general population to an extent of which they can make an informed choice about the implementation of cryptography that they need to use.
So,
Absolutely.
if I could jump in. So I think it's a good question. And I think initially there's going to be a small but non-negligible chance of a method for cryptanalyzing, these first generation of algorithms, simply because, we haven't had quantum computers to try our cryptanalysis algorithms, and they simply haven't been in the field. They've been studied for decades, but they haven't been deployed for very long. So, but it's non-negligible, say 10%, I would estimate. And I think over the next 10 to 20 years, that risk would go down to 1%. So that's still too high to just ignore. And that's why it's important to have more than one standardized algorithm available. Some biodiversity, with different mathematical problems underpinning them. It's far too soon to pick a winner and discard all the other excellent ideas. And that's I think that's the spirit of the NIST competition, the NIST process. And it's also another reason to follow this hybrid approach. So potentially use for where you need a higher assurance, you're more concerned, combine more than one algorithm. Combine the current, elliptic curve cryptography, which is likely the best defense against classical attacks, with your best one or two post-quantum algorithms. And also, again, and it's another reason especially for our most critical platforms, to also combine in quantum key agreement, right? So there's ways. So I think that risk is real. It's always been there. It's there today with, current public key crypto. I think it'll be slightly higher with the new algorithms and eventually taper down over the next 10 to 20 years to similar levels as we currently face with ECC against classical cryptanalysis. But again, we can build a stronger, cyber immune system by even mitigating those risks, by making it much easier to deploy hybrid key agreement and also to layer in quantum key agreement, which can't be mathematically cryptanalyzed. But of course, any system, you have to look at the physical implementation. But I think we can do a much better job than we have in the past at mitigating these risks.
And if I could just add a quick point to that, Amit, I think adding to what Michele said, really fundamental to being able to deliver that kind of capability and flexibility is having agile key management. So crypto agility in your key management systems will be critical in enabling you to support some of today's mechanisms while preparing for the future and allowing you to be able to support the kinds of hybrid models that colleagues have been talking about.
Arguably, though, that agility is going to be more important as we go down and as we look for newer weaknesses. I mean, it's always been important, but I have to say that the majority of our systems are not cryptographically agile now. So it's not that easy to simply swap out one algorithm for another, specifically because of supply chain dependencies and interdependencies for just to get stuff to work. So going down the line, I think we really need to think about re-architecting all of the systems we rely on for any form of intellectual property protection or secrecy for anything going forward, because we just don't have that today.
Yeah, I totally agree in that because agility is missing there. And agility kind of comes in different layers as well. So, I mean, one thing when we talk about cryptographic agility, a lot of times we assume it's just, being able to switch or swap out algorithms. And actually, there is a working solution that ISG has developed on these things. But then the next thing that comes is, to Vikram's points, is that, there's keys as well. So there's the next thing that comes up is, okay, what happens with the keys when we're changing algorithms, because their keys are different for each algorithm. And that was actually quite an interesting research topic. I'm just talking that because I recently researched that one, and I had a talk at ICMC last week on this, how to actually make sure that you can reuse your key material in the proper way, that it's, and still agile. And, the next thing that we're going to come across, which seems to be right now, an intractable solution, is to have truly agile certificates. Because, certificates are they're technically supposed to be these static things, and how do you make it agile? So they're kind of self-contradictory. That's sort of another topic on this. So cryptographic agility comes at various levels. We start implementing step by step. I mean, algorithms, of course, is the first thing to do, but then the keys, and then, it's the way we actually solve this problem of somehow to get secure yet agile certificates.
Thank you. Does anyone else want to jump in on that question, or are we good to move on? Great. So just to remind the audience, we've got about 15 minutes left. If you have any questions for the panel, please stick them in the chat, and I'll get to as many as I can in the time we have remaining. So there's a couple of discussion points that I just want to cover before we finish. The first one is, and I'm going to direct this at Michele first, and then perhaps the others can jump in afterwards. But I mean, to what extent is this hype? We're talking about a computer that doesn't really exist yet, and we're talking about algorithms, quantum secure algorithms, that will mean that the computer that needs to be built to break them will need to be, orders of magnitude more powerful than what we've got available at the moment. So, I mean, is this a real threat?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's good to be critical, but it's dangerous to just be cynical, right? So at one extreme, you have gullible, you just believe everything. At the other extreme, you're just cynical and you just don't believe anything. And I think you want to be in the middle where you're critical. And I don't think it's that hard to sort of renormalize the marketing or hype, as you want to call it. And as I also, tell my students, there's a big difference between something being, 90% hype and 100% hype. So I think in the 90% or 50, whatever it is, if you're clever and you're wise, you can, and you get ready and informed, you can really post-select on the 10% that is real. So I don't really think, I think trying to dismiss this as hype is very dangerous. I think very serious people around the world sincerely believe, and then the key milestones keep being achieved again and again and again. So I think the threat is real. The certainty is not there yet. By the time it's certain, it's far too late to react. And I think the temperature is already too high to be in wait and see mode. So, the hype argument, I think, is just an easy way to dismiss this and not just, responsibly, take on quantum readiness planning. I mean, your plans can continue to track the so-called threat and pivot depending on whether milestones are being achieved sooner or later. So again, there is uncertainty, but the risk is far too high to just ignore and wait till the last minute to prepare.
I could maybe add a thought there, Amit. And I think that goes back to the point Michele made earlier on. The risk is difficult, if not impossible, to quantify today. But I think there is a level of risk, which, as Michele just mentioned, would be dangerous to completely ignore. With prudent planning, though, I think as he referred to earlier on, you can basically take that risk off the table. So as custodians of sensitive data. I think it's incumbent on us to think that through. There are, and increasingly becoming, available, well-established pathways to dramatically reduce that risk. So I guess the question would become, why wouldn't you do so?
Yeah. And I'd like to follow that up. Why wouldn't we take a chance to design security in from the beginning? We've got new ideas on the table now with regard to security. We're having a much more mature conversation here about the dangers of quantum and what the dangers are of rushing to judgment and to too rapidly change a system or rely on any particular algorithm. So I still think that stepping back was just mentioned, prudence, thinking through defense in depth. We don't need to worry as much about a quantum computer in the next few weeks as we do a poorly designed algorithm rushed in to defend against a hypothetical quantum computer. That's true. But leaving it off the table and losing the opportunity to rethink how we deal with networks, how we deal with computing, how we deal with sensors would be equally, let's say, gullible. There's a lot of good out there beyond just worrying about high performance quantum computing. Why not think about an agile crypt net infrastructure? Why not design that in and let it be on the scale that quantum computing is driving? I don't see any disadvantage there. It's the rush or the ignoring of it that leads us into trouble.
Thank you so much, Deborah. So we've got about 10 minutes left. So I'm going to ask everyone for their kind of, headline takeaway for the people who may be watching. So I guess, cybersecurity professionals or companies that might be worried about, securing their sensitive data. So if each of you could just give a kind of very, very short kind of, takeaway message, what actions, how worried should they be about quantum, and what actions can they take today to kind of help, secure their business or secure their company's data. So we'll go in reverse order from how we open. So starting with you, Vladimir.
So I think one of the actions is for many large organizations to understand is, first of all, to understand that quantum threat is real. That's usually the first bottleneck that kind of prevents them from moving on. Second thing is I would suggest moving to something like looking at the critical infrastructure. For example, say if we're talking about a bank, and let's say they have headquarters, they have database, data centers, they have cloud. Maybe at least put a hybrid encryption there. So, having, some FIPS validated classical crypto together with post-quantum crypto, which is still considered FIPS validated. So, they still have the validation, everything in place, but put at least those links. So as we call it, as protection along the perimeter. So that's the first step for them to do to at least feel safe that, if the quantum threat computer comes, quantum threat appears, at least they're protected. Or if somebody is, recording their data to decrypt it later, again, they're protected against that threat. And then the next step after doing, this very essential few steps, then is to start moving to agility, because agility will give, huge power in terms of, whatever gets standardized or, multiple algorithms can get standardized, they'll be able to migrate to them, first of all, in an easier approach, and then to actually be able to switch among them. And, cryptanalysis is going to be happening along the way. After even the standards are out there, we'll know that some schemes like, similar process going from RSA to ECC, for example. I'm sure there's going to be something like this in the post-quantum era as well. So, but this will, make their lives easier for decades if they're going to be in an, on an agile approach to their architecture.
Thank you. Vikram, over to you.
Thanks, Amit. I think perhaps just recapping some of the items we touched on, what we think is critical is for organizations to really understand the data holdings that they have, and what is sensitive within those data holdings, what potential threat vectors those holdings are exposed to, and therefrom coming up with an appropriate protection profile to protect that information. And the kinds of things that can be done, as we were just touching on, and some of these are available today, is true random number generation. So ensure that your various cryptographic credentials are constructed from the highest quality building blocks. So consider using true random numbers for that. Look and keep a watching brief on the developments in the quantum resistant algorithm. So be well versed with what's happening there. And as Jaya mentioned, a lot of our systems today are not cryptographically agile. So develop a roadmap to moving towards key management that is cryptographically agile. And similarly with the emergent technology around quantum key distribution, keep a watching brief on that and see where and how it may fit within your future networks.
Thank you very much for that, Vikram. Jaya, over to you.
Yeah, so coming from a telco background, we were critical infrastructure. So I think that for pretty much every company, when it comes to getting towards this new post-quantum future, it's about doing 5 things. First and foremost, make an inventory of your crypto assets. Most companies have no idea what they use and then for which purpose. The second thing is thinking it through for implementation readiness. So how ready are you? If we're looking for that crypto agility and we know we need to look for opportunities there, how can you think it through for those implementation problems that you could encounter? And, that crypto agility and those opportunities are like the third thing that you already want to kind of plan now. If you were to swap out algorithms now, or if you were to look at, using different types of key exchange, then how would you start going about that? The fourth thing is really looking at policies for very specific innovation areas. With all technology, most people don't invest on the stuff they've already got because they've written it off as sunk cost. So you're not going to redo everything you've got. But I think if we focus on innovation areas, you have a chance to start building with security in mind and creating those defense in-depth strategies that we all want. In order to do that, for those innovation areas, you got to engage now with your hardware and software vendor community. So figuring out what you have and then making it available and future-proof is part of that vendor thing. If you would do that, the easiest way that I've found is to start writing supplier security annexes that include your requirements, even if it's just pinning it to standardization or very specific types of things that you want to do in terms of implementation ideas, all good, but put it in your supplier security annexes now. And to tie it all together, I think we need to encourage our communities to start playing and start failing early with all of this stuff. That's it.
Thank you. Michele, any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think any large enterprise organization needs to develop a serious risk-based quantum readiness plan, and one that is updated regularly. And I mean, for real, there has to be real accountability for the plan. There has to be executive support and resources for the plan, as this really cuts across many aspects of the enterprise. So if you don't have high-level support, it's going to be very hard to implement the plan. And again, the planning is not expensive. It's an ounce of prevention that can really create a lot of value in the medium term, including board-level support. Now, when you do your own quantum risk assessment, that will dictate your next steps in terms of exploring, testing, and eventually deploying solutions. These are your mitigation and migration plans. And Jaya walked us through most of those steps right now with very great examples of what this really means in practice. Right? If we keep putting it off because we're busy with other things, which of course we are, but great organizations are those who manage to set aside a bit of their time to look at the more strategic medium to long-term issues. So if we keep focusing only on the short-term, water we're drinking from a fire hose, then as Deborah pointed us to, a rush, then inevitably, when it's clear that this is happening imminently, you're going to be rushing and you're going to do flawed implementations. There's going to be many losses. Again, you're going to be attacked, not by quantum attacks, but by all the mundane attacks we're seeing. And you're also going to lose business because of interoperability, right? Business and functionality, because a rushed migration through these complex supply chains that Jaya mentioned, it's not going to be pretty, the outcome. On the other hand, if we take a proactive approach, again, as Deborah has outlined, you'll have a much better platform, a more agile, resilient platform. You won't make as many of these mistakes. The migration will be cheaper. There'll be fewer losses. People have more confidence in your organization, in your sector. And again, will be much better to deal with other unexpected advances in cyber attacks because we've built a stronger foundation.
Thank you so much. Deborah, final word to you.
Okay, sure. I'll give you three thoughts. First one, prudent proactivity. I've heard my colleagues have mentioned some fantastic best practices for companies. Everyone's got a different timeline. Those that are designing hardware that's going to be inaccessible for a couple of decades have a different timeline than those that are developing software that will be changed out for commodity systems more rapidly. Implement the suggestions my colleagues have made. Vigilance. It's quantum computing, quantum threat we're talking about now, but there are so many creative ways people attack computing systems. It might be in bio-inspired next. That doesn't make these things a pipe dream. It means that the reality of our profession is we have to think ahead in terms of what adversarial action there might be. Agility, resilience, all of those things are important, designing security in, but then being aware that we're likely to mix something. And then finally, I want to end on a note of hope, which is creativity. There are so many ways we might potentially leverage small quantum sensors, perhaps random number generators, things that we might be able to do with communications that are more near term than a high performance computing's threat of quantum in this area, that I don't want us to lose sight of the leverage, the economic advantage, those things that we might do with a quantum computer for sake of making sure that all of the possible dire uses of it are kept out of practice. If we use proactive prudence and we're vigilant, we should be able to be creative safely. And thanks again for inviting me on this panel.
Thank you so much. So thanks, everyone. So I think the bywords for today are vigilance and agility. So that's probably the takeaway message that I've learned from you guys. So thank you so much for joining us as a panel. Thank you, everyone, for watching. We are just about out of time, but yeah, I hope you've enjoyed it and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Amit.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Vigilance is probably the key word here, and some conclusions and implications really make hair stand on end, even if you don't have it. Well, you also learn that we may not be ready for quantum time, yet the phrase post-quantum world was mentioned at least twice.